Hey everyone, John T. Hickmet here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to answer one of the most common questions I get from people trying to heal their chronic symptoms. It's a question I asked myself many years ago when I had symptoms. The question is this: why do some people read a mind-body book, a John Sarno book for example, have this incredible breakthrough and their symptoms disappear, while other people read exactly the same book, completely understand it, and yet they're still struggling months or even years later? If that's where you are right now, I know how frustrating and disheartening that can feel, and that's why I've created this video. I remember when I first discovered John Sarno's work, I was reading the pages thinking, this is me, this explains everything. It was one of the first times I genuinely felt hope, because the first time ever my symptoms made more sense. Anyone who's read one of these type of mind-body books probably knows that feeling. You suddenly think, this could be it. This could finally be my way out, as Alan Gordon talks about the way out. And that's exactly how it felt to me. I was excited. I finally felt understood. But here's the thing. Even though I understood the theory, I didn't suddenly recover. I still had IBS. I still had chronic back pain. I still find myself worrying about my body. I was left asking exactly the same questions that many of you ask me right now. If this information is true, why didn't it heal me? Why did it seem to work for other people but not for me? Maybe you've asked yourself exactly the same thing. Maybe you've even wondered whether there's something different about you. Before I go any further, I want to say something that I think is incredibly important. Just because reading a book wasn't enough for you, and it wasn't for me, does not mean you're harder to heal. It doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you failed. And it certainly doesn't mean you've missed the one secret everyone else has found. Those are the stories our minds naturally create when we compare ourselves to other people. We see somebody else's recovery story and immediately wonder what we're doing wrong. I know that because I did exactly the same thing when I had symptoms. So let's answer this question. Why do some people heal just from reading a book? Now, I want to be honest with you. I don't think anyone truly knows why recovery looks like for one person over another. I think we have some very good theories. We have observations. We have approaches that help a lot of people. But I don't think anyone has every answer. If somebody tells you exactly why one person heals after reading a single book while another person needs years of deeper work, I think they're claiming a level of certainty that simply isn't there. I certainly don't know the complete answer, and I'm comfortable saying that because I think honesty matters. What I do know, though, is that different people seem to need different things, including myself. For some people, simply understanding that their symptoms aren't caused by structural damage creates such a profound shift that their nervous system begins to settle. Their fear reduces, their body starts to feel safer. It can really happen like that for people. Book cures. For other people, understanding is only the beginning. They can completely believe the theory, they can agree with everything they're reading, they can understand the neuroscience, and yet they still find themselves stuck in the same old patterns. That doesn't mean the theory is wrong. It simply means knowledge alone wasn't enough. So why do some people need more than just books? Looking back now, I can see that reading Sarno's books opened the door for me, but I still had to walk through it. I had to learn meditation, I had to journal, I had to go to therapy, I had to understand my emotions, I had to build a different relationship with fear, I had to build a different relationship with myself. One way I think about it is this. Imagine somebody has spent their whole life holding their breath without realizing it. Reading the book helps them realize, oh, I'm holding my breath. It's incredibly valuable. But recognizing it isn't the same as learning how to start to breathe differently. That takes practice, repetition, and experience. Not that you have to breathe differently to get better. It's just an analogy. Healing can be similar. Understanding matters, but our nervous system often learns through experience, not just information. Sometimes we need to repeatedly experience safety in the body before we can believe it. I've also worked with people who had what was called a book cure. They read a book years ago or read a book years ago, and then their symptoms disappeared. But then something happened in life. Maybe there was grief, maybe there was a difficult relationship, and their symptoms returned. And this time the same book no longer healed them. Now they need something different. They need to understand themselves more deeply. They need emotional work. They need support. That alone tells me recovery isn't always a one-size-fits-all process. What we need can change throughout our lives. At one stage the book helped, but now I need more support. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make is comparing our recovery to somebody else's. We hear someone say, I read one book and I recovered in 2 weeks. And immediately our mind says, well, what's wrong with me? Maybe this doesn't apply to me. But you don't know that person's story. You don't know what emotional resources they already had. You don't know how much fear they were carrying. You don't know what their upbringing was like. You're comparing the inside of your life to the outside of somebody else's story, and that's never a fair comparison. Another thing I've noticed is that many people quietly believe needing support is somehow a sign of failure. As though if you really understand this work, you wouldn't need a therapist, a coach, or a community. I don't see it that way at all. We don't judge ourselves for needing a teacher when we're learning a language. We don't judge ourselves for needing a coach when we're learning a sport. Yet when it comes to emotional healing, chronic pain healing, we somehow expect ourselves to figure everything out alone. That expectation creates so much unnecessary shame. For me, one of the biggest turning points was accepting that I didn't have to do this by myself. That wasn't admitting defeat. It was actually the beginning of my actual healing. Sometimes support isn't about giving you new information. Sometimes it's about helping you experience what you already understand intellectually, but learning how to be in the body with it. So why do some people need more time than other people? This is another question I get asked all the time. Some people want to know how long healing should take. I mean, everyone does. I completely understand why. When you're living with symptoms, time can feel unbearable. Every extra week can feel evidence that something isn't working. The truth is, I've seen people recover incredibly quickly. I've also seen people need much longer. I've worked with people who noticed dramatic changes within a month, and I've worked with people whose recovery unfolded over 2 or 3 years. I wish I could tell you exactly why that is. I can't. Part of the reason may simply be that every nervous system is just different. Every life is different. Some people have had very few demands on them. Others are raising young children, caring for aging parents, working full-time, and trying to heal in the tiny gaps between everything else. Just creating consistency with the practices can be a huge challenge. For some people, there are just deeper emotional patterns that only begin to reveal themselves once they start doing this work for a while. Sometimes we discover fears we didn't know we had. Sometimes we discover protector parts that have been quietly running our lives for years without us ever noticing them. One example of this is self-sabotaging parts of us. And I know that's a difficult thing to hear because nobody consciously wants to stay in pain. But from an IFS perspective, sometimes there are parts of us that genuinely believe symptoms are keeping us safe. That doesn't mean you're choosing your symptoms. It doesn't mean you're doing this to yourself. It simply may mean that some protective parts of your psyche may see life without symptoms as more frightening than life with them. After all, if you've lived with symptoms for years, those symptoms have shaped your identity. They've changed your routines. They've influenced your relationships. They've affected the way you see yourself and the way you move through the world. Sometimes getting better, getting free from symptoms means returning to life. It means dating again, going back to work, traveling, saying yes to opportunities, setting boundaries, taking risks, living more fully. And for some parts of us, that can feel far more threatening than staying where we are in healing. Again, if you're listening to this, I'm not saying this is definitely happening to you. I'm simply saying it's one of many possibilities that can emerge during the healing process. If it's happening, our job isn't to force those self-sabotage parts to disappear. It's to understand what they're protecting us from. There are so many different lessons people seem to learn through this process. Some people may need to rest more. Some people may need to learn to be more active. Some people need to leave a relationship. Others may need to become more vulnerable with someone. Some people need stronger boundaries. Others need to reconnect with life after years of hiding. That's why comparison simply doesn't work. Your nervous system isn't trying to become somebody else's nervous system. It's learning what safety looks like for you. It's a deeply personal journey. People will often ask me how long it took me to recover. And I usually say it's around 6 months, but even that answer isn't completely accurate because I'd already begun meditating for years before I ever discovered the mind-body approach. So was it really 6 months or was it several years? I honestly don't know. That's another reason I don't like making promises about timelines. Every experience builds upon the one before it. This is where we get into the deeper emotional work. So I want to say something that feels very important. A part of me naturally wants to reassure you watching this. A part of me wants to tell you that everything will be okay, that you'll get there, and that you just need to be kind to yourself. And of course there's truth in that. If you've watched this far, then obviously you're someone that wants to hear that. But I've also learned that it's not always so simple. Sometimes the very thing stopping us from being kind to ourselves is another part that's frightened, critical, or deeply disappointed. If I simply tell you to be kind to yourself, that critical part may hear another impossible task. It may think, great, now I'm failing at self-compassion as well. From an IFS perspective, those critical parts aren't mistakes. They're not getting in the way of healing. They may actually be the very experience that your healing is inviting you to understand. Instead of trying to get rid of critical parts, we simply learn how to build a different relationship with them. That's where meditation, journaling, therapy, and parts work become so valuable, not because they're magical techniques that make symptoms disappear overnight, but because they help us stay present with experiences we spent years thinking we need to push away. We stop trying to get space from our emotions and gradually learn how to hold space for them instead. That distinction changed everything for me. I wasn't trying to eliminate fear anymore. I was learning how to be with fear. I wasn't trying to silence my inner critic. I was becoming curious about why that part believed it had to work so hard to protect me. Maybe that's part of some of the deeper emotional work that you need to hear, not because you're more damaged than anyone else, but because there are parts of you that have been carrying an enormous burden for a very long time. Those parts of you don't need to disappear because we've read a really good book, right? So, and this goes for anything that's coming up for your system in meditation. If you're someone that's been meditating for a while, you've been journaling, maybe you've been in therapy, maybe you've just been in these communities and watched a lot of videos, you may be thinking that there is one big emotion that you need to feel, one big breakthrough, one big experience, one big shaking that has to happen. And you may have that sometime, one big release that needs to happen. You may have that sometimes, but often what you need to be with is boredom. You need to be with something that feels stuck. You need to stay with a critic. You need to stay with nothingness, with numbness. Or you need to stay with low feelings or critical feelings or doubtful feelings or feelings where you want to have a temper tantrum, feelings where things feel unfair. I've done other videos about why setbacks are necessary rather than hindrances to the process, because every time there's a setback in this process, which there often will be when we have begun healing, we've begun allowing, as long as we're interpreting what's occurring for us as setbacks, it means there's still emotional work for us to do. Because if symptoms arise for us, again, and parts of us think, oh God, I'm back to square one, I've done this wrong, am I never going to get better? And there's lots of fear and catastrophizing come up, lots of this is unfair coming up, lots of parts that want to have a temper tantrum coming up. It's not a mistake. You're meant to re-experience those emotions again. And your symptoms re-arising in a setback fashion are giving you the opportunity again to feel the parts of you that want to be felt. Parts of you want to feel like it's okay to feel like this is unfair. It's okay to feel fear. It's okay to have a temper tantrum in meditation, therapy, and journaling in your safe spaces. Setbacks are necessary. Setbacks are important because they invite us to experience the emotions that we've been putting off perhaps all our life again and again. So that's the deeper emotional work. It's about learning how to acknowledge what's arising for us, even if you're not quite clear that it's a fear or which emotion it is specifically, even if it's just a something happening. The process requires us to learn how to acknowledge what's arising and how it's not a mistake what's arising, how to be with what's arising, and how to let go of control about what occurs when we start to allow what's arising. I said a lot of different things there. Let's say you go into meditation, you notice that symptoms are there, you feel afraid towards it, you learn how to feel the fear, and you learn how to allow anything to occur next. When you allow fear to be there, can you let fear stay the same? When you allow fear to be there, can you allow it to get bigger? When you allow fear to be there, and a part of you comes in and doesn't want it to be there, can you allow that part that's resisting the experience to be there? This is why the deeper emotional work becomes very transformative, because when you learn to do that in your meditation, in your journaling, in your therapy, something begins to shift. You no longer fear fear. You learn how to be safer with the emotions coming up for you, which are born out of the symptoms. And when you learn to feel safer with those emotions, something else happens. You start to gradually become more indifferent towards your symptoms. You start to recognize that actually, I'm okay feeling afraid. I'm okay feeling frustrated. I'm okay with my symptoms. And when that starts to emerge, which is what happened to me 6 months into my process, you start to get back to life again. You start, you know what, I am going to go and meet up with my friends. And if symptoms occur and some fear occurs, I know how to be with it because I've been practicing for a while. And you start to recognize that symptoms and emotions, they peak, they rise and fall, right? If you're watching this and it feels like symptoms are happening every moment of every day for you, and you're saying things don't peak, they're just here for me consistently. This is why learning to meditate, this is why perhaps getting support may be necessary for you, so you can have someone facilitate the experience for you to show you how things are rising and falling. Let's get into the final thoughts. Let's summarize this so the video isn't so long. My symptoms, particularly my IBS that I had, it kept calling me back into my body over and over again. At the time, I hated them for it. I wanted it to be gone. But over time, I realized they were constantly inviting me to notice what I was running away from. Fear, anger, sadness, vulnerability. All the emotions I'd spent years trying not to feel. So if you're watching this because you've read the books, you've listened to the podcast, watched the videos, and you're wondering, why isn't this enough for me? I really want you to hear this. Please don't mistake the length of your journey for the likelihood of your recovery. Those are two completely different things. The fact that you're still here, you're still searching, you're still learning, you're still watching videos like this one, it doesn't tell me you're failing. It tells me there's a part of you that hasn't given up on yourself yet. And I think that's a part worth listening to. To summarize everything we've talked about today, I don't think anyone knows with complete certainty why some people recover after reading a book while other people need much more support. We have very good theories, but we don't have every answer. And I think it's healthy to admit that. What I do know is that recovery isn't a competition. Comparison rarely helps. Different people need different things. Some people need understanding, some people need experience. Most people need both. So, if you're feeling frustrated today, I completely understand. It makes sense that you're frustrated. It makes sense that another part of you may feel critical, disappointed, or impatient. Those reactions aren't evidence that you're failing. They're simply more experiences that deserve your attention and your curiosity. If you don't know what that means, that's where meditation comes in. That's why something like journaling and therapy and community comes in. How to learn to be with parts of you that are disappointed. How to learn to no longer identify with disappointment, and to learn how to experience it in the body, and to learn how, by going into the body with an emotion, by learning how to be with something instead of trying to fix it in the mind or reassure yourself or reframe it or move on from it, by learning to be in the body instead with it, that's when the body starts to go, okay, John T's with this experience in the body. He's not trying to fix it anymore. I'm going to let it come up and I'm going to let it come down. When we spend years trying to fix, when we spend years trying to reframe because we're trying to be a certain person for everyone, that's what perpetuates emotions, feeling big. That's what perpetuates symptoms. It's something the great and wonderful Sam Miller speaks about, the old maps and moving on to the new maps. She speaks about we come into this life and because of our caregivers, because of everyone around us, Hollywood and the media teach us how to be a certain way, and we're given a map to life, and it says we've got to be people pleasers and we can't feel fear and we've got to correct ourselves out of anger. And now when we go through this healing process, we're moving on from those old maps of people pleasing and being not letting ourselves feel anger and fear, and developing new maps. And it takes time to get from the old map to the new map. Sam Miller is someone that speaks about it very eloquently, but many people have spoken about this for years and years and years, decades, centuries. Mindfulness practitioners have spoken about moving on from how we've been raised, nurtured, to our homecoming, really, to someone new that we can be, someone where we learn how to feel safe with fear. We learn how to be in the body with emotions instead of trying to move on from them. So, finally, to summarize, if reading a book wasn't enough for you, please don't take that as evidence that you can't recover. It certainly wasn't true for me. I couldn't read the book and get better. Sometimes healing asks us to go a little deeper than we expected, some of the things that I've shared today. If you're listening to this and a part of you is saying, it's completely unfair, I completely understand, I had those thoughts too, maybe you're having them right now, and maybe a part of you is exhausted. Maybe another part of you is angry. Maybe another part of you is asking, why does everyone else seem to get better so much more easily than I do? And on the one hand, a part of me wants to, again, reassure you. A part of me wants to tell you that everything will be okay. And of course, if you go through this process, you'll be okay. But I also don't want you to miss something that is incredibly important. From the perspective of the work that we do, IFS, mindfulness, the feelings of unfairness, frustration, criticism, disappointment aren't mistakes. They aren't getting in the way of your healing. They may actually be the very experiences that your healing is inviting you to learn how to be with. Maybe unfairness isn't something that needs to disappear. Maybe there was a time in your life when you weren't allowed to feel that life was unfair. Maybe you couldn't protest. Maybe you couldn't have a tantrum. Maybe you couldn't say this isn't okay. Those feelings had to be pushed away because they don't they didn't feel safe to express. So years later, when they begin to surface again, our instinct is often to make them go away. But perhaps that's what's not asking to be fixed at all. Perhaps they're finally trying to be heard. I often say that one of the biggest lessons I had to learn was the difference between holding space for my emotions and trying to get space for my emotions. Those are two completely different things. Healing began for me when I slowly learned how to stay with what I was feeling instead of trying to escape it. So if you're still on this journey, don't use somebody else's recovery timeline as evidence that you failed. Stay curious about your own experience. Keep showing up. Keep learning about yourself. Get support if you need it. Not because you're broken, but because sometimes we all need help learning how to sit with the parts of ourselves that we've never been taught to understand. There's no prize for healing the fastest. The goal is simply to lose your symptoms. The goal is to build a relationship with yourself that allows you to stay present with whatever arises. In my experience, that's where the deepest healing begins. So thank you for watching the video. I said a lot of different things. I often get out of breath when I do these videos. Maybe I have to learn how to speak better. But if you have any questions, anything that you'd like to share about where you're at in your process, please do ask below. It means a lot to me when people write comments below because it can help me understand what sorts of help that everyone needs. It can help me understand what sorts of videos I want to create. If you've watched this far and you're shouting at the screen saying, John T, please make this video, write it in the comments below. Say, John T, do this video and I will watch it. Because I create a lot of videos. It may feel as if this whole process is very complex because of all the videos that I create, but it truly isn't. It truly is just a matter of learning the tools, learning how to incorporate them into your life, giving yourself time, getting support and guidance where you need it, and then surely but eventually the whole thing unfolds and symptoms no longer strangling you in life anymore. That's it. Thanks for watching. Hopefully speak to you soon.